go ahead and start counting. So you got 60 minutes from now, and go ahead and good luck. And if it wants that you want to slip out, when you do that, I'll come in and change it from 2 to 1 for you. Okay?
So it has started. I thought maybe there'd be some counting down, like you mentioned.
This is James A. Cruzen. The date. And go ahead, start.
This is a recording made in the Riverton LDS Family History Library on Wednesday, November 4th or 5th, 2015. We were really not ready for this. The misunderstanding, but the appointment was made, and we will spend the time recording some of my life history. Lucy, where do you think we should start with you asking some of these questions, or should I just start in on what I had in mind?
Start with your earliest memory of your life.
For the earliest memory of my life, we can follow this outline. I remember living in the house on Wilson Avenue in Salt Lake City. My folks had bought that home several years earlier, and I was born on October 21st, 1928. I remember that big house. From 1928 until about 1933 or so, we lived in that home, and then moved to 1020 Ramona Avenue. Both of these are considered in the Sugar House area of Salt Lake City, Utah. The home was really a duplex. In one half of the home, there were renters from some relatives. Joe Griffin and his family lived there. In part of the house, Dad and Mother and Glenn and I lived in the east side of the house. That home was a two-story home with bedrooms upstairs and the other things downstairs. And I can remember a little bit about it, partly because the basement was unfinished. There's an area in order to get down there and get to the furnace, and that's where the coal came in a chute on the side of the house when it was delivered, and it then had to be shoveled into the furnace. I don't remember much about it, but just that it was an area that was there, but not used. I can remember sitting in a big chair with my mother, probably in my mother's lap, and she was talking to me, and this was right by the stairway that went up to the upper bedrooms. Don't remember too much more about that, other than there was no driveway that came in from the front of the yard. There was a street behind the house, but we didn't have a car. Dad was on the police force, and he could walk up to the corner of 11th East and take the streetcar to get to town or wherever his assignment was. But part of that time, his police assignment was foot patrol, as they refer to it today, in the Sugar House area. And I can remember going with him a time, I don't know how many times, but enough that I remember walking with him to the little police substation that was there, and then walking around to different places in the area. He was very well known and very well liked, and that was only a walk of about 2 blocks or 3 blocks to get from where we lived to where his assignment was.
What are some of your family traditions?
Family traditions. One of them, even starting from there, was going fishing and camping in the mountains. We had a neighbor by the name of Gus Allen who had a panel truck, and Dad would arrange with him to drive us up to places, and Glenn and I and Dad and Mother would ride with him in that panel truck with our...
Boy Scouts?
No Boy Scouts, not at that time. At the time. We lived there until I was about 5, but during that time, Gus Allen, I hope I've got that name right, but he drove us up to places on the Provo River where we camped. This was Provo River, south of Camas, and between there and Heber City. Dad loved to fish, and he would walk up and down the river and fish, and we kids would tag along. We rented a very sparse, tiny little cabin that had some beds in it and had a stove, and we enjoyed it. That's one of the best family traditions that we had. We also visited back and forth to Logan and Clarkston, Utah, where Dad's parents or family was in Logan, Mother's family was in Clarkston, basically. But visiting there, and then also having visitors from there coming and staying with us in Salt Lake City. Family traditions, we did play board games and some card games.
What family childhood games did you play?
We were, as children, we were out on the street quite a lot in the neighborhood, in others' home, in and out of others' homes, our friends' homes, but groups of us.
What family heirlooms do you have?
I don't think of any right offhand other than some furniture.
Tell about a childhood hiding place.
Hiding place in while we lived on Wilson Avenue, there were rooms, I guess they'd be considered attic rooms, which were beyond the bedrooms.
What were Sundays like when you were growing up?
Growing up time covers a lot of time. As a young boy, I know I started primary, and it was about 3 blocks to get to our chapel. Always it was walking back and forth, never any any automobile transportation.
What illnesses or accidents have you had?
This could take up a good part of the conversation today, illnesses and so forth. One of the worst, one of the most serious, was one time when we were camped up in I think it was the Shady Rest camp at what is now the Deer Creek Reservoir area. The road from Midway going south crosses the river as it flows into Deer Creek Reservoir. And while we were there one time, I was walking up and down the side of the stream, and I cut my foot on a broken bottle and was bleeding. The cut was on the inside of my left foot, and it was bleeding quite badly, and Glenn, my brother, carried me back to the house. Mother doctored it up. It was never stitched. It wasn't, the cut was only less than an inch long on the side of the big toe. But that was the first major problem. Another one that came many years later was when I was, I hope I have this recorded somewhere, but I woke up that we had moved to the house at 1020 Ramona, and on a Sunday morning when I was of deacon age, I had probably like 100% perfect attendance record, but that Sunday I woke up and I was hurting, and I could not get comfortable. My abdomen was very sensitive and was hurting very, very badly. And my mother, who was a registered nurse, determined that we had to get me to the hospital. I presume she called the doctor, but whatever. By this time, my dad was working in a patrol car, a police car, and working in its shift. It was unusual for him to be working on Sundays because with his shift work, he only had 2 months of shift work a year. The rest of the time were afternoons or morning, nights. But anyway, he called, found out which his fellow officers were in that area, and they came and they loaded me into that car to go to the hospital. There was no back seat in the car, but through the trunk area they could load a stretcher in and out and carry patients. So I was carried to LDS Hospital. This was done in fairly early morning, maybe, I don't know, 8, 9, or 10 o'clock. By 3 o'clock, my appendix had been removed, and it was perforated, which means that there were openings in it that was considered a ruptured appendix. And it was good that we got me to the hospital in good time.
What? Go ahead.
Do you want more about that?
No.
I think some of this has been I have
What
time.
do you remember about your
I have time to-
grandparents?
I do not remember my grandfather Crookston. I think he died shortly before or around the time I was born. Grandmother Crookston was very friendly and pleasant person, and very busy in her life. She spent time helping at the Logan Temple. And I think it was, well, from the Crookston home in the south part of Logan, pretty close to the business district. She walked from her home on 2nd South, maybe 2nd West, walked from there to serve in the temple, which was up on the hill. My dad tried to visit her several times during our youth, to drive to Logan, and sometimes, or at least one time, I remember we had gone on up the canyon and were fishing in the Logan River, this small, not a real big stream, but Dad caught some fish and took them to his mother. But
What were your brothers like?
now their grandparents on the other side, we'll talk about that some other time. Lucy, I really don't need those questions.
What?
I really don't need those questions.
Your brothers?
No, I mean the whole series. What are my
What
brothers?
trip or vacation do you remember? Special things in your neighborhood?
I could spend time on every one of those. Do you really want?
Just
do you-
tell what your neighborhood was like.
The neighborhood, there are very few vacant lots in our neighborhood. Most all of the homes have been built probably in the teens and the 20s of 1900. As children, we played a lot up and down the streets and also in the vacant lots. Sometimes we even dug things, we called them dugouts. And
How many people were in your family?
in my family, Glenn was born about 2 years before I was born. Richard was not born until I was 6. He was born shortly after we moved from Wilson Avenue to Ramona Avenue. And then Steve was born 4 years after Richard in 1938. We had the 4 boys, no girls.
What were your household chores?
My mother, being a graduate nurse, a registered nurse, did not work in the hospitals until after Richard was several years old. Along towards the end of 1930, she went back to work. And then through the years of World War II, she worked most of the time. But it was shift work. Dad's shift, I referred to the fact that he only had 2 months when he worked daytime. Many times I have a remembrance of him spending the time waiting to go to work, like the afternoon shift. He'd be home during the day and then go about 3 o'clock to go to work. Sometimes he had to walk to the Sugar House police station or to the streetcar to go to town. But after that, when he'd go on shift, someone in a patrol car who was in our area would pick him up and take him to work. We also had a bus that came just a block from our home, so we had good transportation to and from town.
What did you do, have anything to do in the military? Where, when, and what was it like?
I volunteered into the U.S. Army after World War II. By that time, the family had moved to Arizona. It was in Arizona that I joined the Army. And I served. I wish I was better prepared for this. I have the dates. It was 29th of June of 1946 that I enlisted in Phoenix, Arizona. Spent about a week in Fort Bliss at El Paso, Texas, and then traveled on to.
Did you face any childhood challenges to overcome? Health or school?
The appendicitis was the biggest challenge, and that lasted, but just a very few days. I was in the hospital maybe 3 days. As soon as I got out of the hospital, I was walking around the neighborhood and even several blocks. It was as if I did cause a bit of a problem in helping carry a big furniture box from one of the furniture stores in Sugar House, helping carry it back as a plate activity. I evidently stretched my abdomen, and the scar from the appendix removal was stretched, and so instead of a tiny line, it's a stretch marks of scar about a half-inch across.
How did your mother spend her time and your father? How did they spend their time?
Both of them did quite a bit of reading. Mother, with Dad's unusual hours, was there alone a lot of time. She did a lot of reading of novels. We had a good branch of the library. The Sprague branch of the library in Sugar House was only a couple of blocks away. She'd check books out there or have us check books out for her. Mysteries and westerns and novels of that type. We could. I don't know that Glenn did it, but I know I went to get books for her rather frequently. And going away from Sugar House, there was the drugstore at 17th South and 11th East had a book rental system of novels and things, and we go and get 5 or 6 of those books at a time, and the rental cost was very, very inexpensive, just 2 cents a day or something. Dad loved to read the newspaper. He also would worked in our big garden. We had a big yard, and we had a big garden in the backyard that he worked in quite a bit.
What changes have you seen in your lifetime? Telephone, typewriters, other mechanical things?
I don't remember the telephones in our first home because I was just 5 or 6 when we moved away. I presume we had a telephone, but in our home in Ramona Avenue, we had a telephone that was a party line, meaning that several families' telephones were all on the same line. And if we wanted to make a phone call, we picked it up, we could hear them talking, we'd hang up. Later, we'd hear the voice of the operator saying, "Number, please." And we would give the number, which the number that we had at that time was about three or four digits, like 3475. And then there was a word before that though. And I think one of the words was Wasatch, like Wasatch 3475. And the operator would plug in the proper connections to get that line. Wasatch, I believe, was one of them. I don't remember what the other one was. Years went by, and gradually, then we had only one family on the line. Radio, we had a radio which we listened to quite a bit. There were children's programs, and there were adult mystery programs and news programs. No television until many, many, many years later. We did have a record player and had big discs, black discs, nearly 12 inches in diameter, and they would play for just up to about 10 or 15 minutes, I think, engraved on both sides.
Did you have any favorite friends when you were growing up?
Yes. We've done about 30 minutes of this kind of recording. Lucy, why don't you go start on some of your things, and I'll tell some of the others. I can tell a little bit either about military or scouting or whatever. I really want to record see what I've got in print before I go.
This will help you remember.
Yes.
Okay, what about
So-
your friend in Idaho and your
That
friend in Arizona right now,
Well,
or St. George? 2 of them.
some of that I typed up, and I'm not sure just what I've got typed. I'd like to look at them, and I'll try and record something new here today.
What was a typical?
Will you leave now and work on yours?
Hmm?
Will you leave now and work on what you want to do here at the library today?
What are you going to do?
I'll record some more.
Okay. They asked me to stay.
No.
Yeah, keep talking. Go on to this.
Dad retired from the police force in 1945. he finished 20 years with the police force, and it was decided because of his health conditions that the family would move to Arizona, would move somewhere. He went down to Arizona where another policeman friend was living, not in Arizona, but I think it was southern Utah, near St. George. Dad went down to visit there and visited in Arizona. The decision was made to sell the home in Salt Lake and move the family to Arizona. In 1945, Glenn, my older brother, was in the Merchant Marine, or later I think it was transferred into the U.S. Navy. And so, and Mother and Richard and Steve and I went by bus to travel to Arizona to a home that they purchased in a few blocks west of the Capitol building on Jefferson Street. It was there, at that time I was in school at Utah State University as a freshman. I went down in April, hitchhiking and by bus, went down to see the family, and then returned and finished the spring quarter at Utah State University. After that quarter was finished, I went by bus and hitchhiking to get back down to Arizona, and wanted to, after visiting, I wanted to go back to Utah and work in the Forest Service for the second summer. I know I've got some of this on tape. But during that time, I met Lucy Fuller, and then I went in the Army, and from in the Army came home. I'd like to try and get some part of this done that I don't have in print or otherwise recorded. So I'm going to start in a little bit about Brighton. Brighton is a residential community and sport and recreation community at the mouth of Big Cottonwood Canyon near Salt Lake City, Utah. The road up the canyon is about 15 miles. During the sometime during the 1930s, my dad's older brother, Lee Crookston, who was a school teacher, he taught wood shop, especially at Bryan Junior High School in Salt Lake City. In the summer months, he was hired or contracted to oversee some rental cabins in the Brighton community. While doing that, he purchased a lot, which is right next to the tennis court, near the south end of the loop at Brighton. Dad took us up the canyon to visit Uncle Lee and Aunt Hazel in their little cabin. Dad had salvaged some lumber, which was stored in the old house on Wilson Avenue. He donated that lumber to Uncle Lee to help build that little cabin. But going up there and visiting during the summer months, I wandered up and down, especially up and down the creek where the stream that ran through the south end of Brighton along the west side, and the creek that came out of the lake, and then that creek ran down and into Silver Lake. But up and down that creek, I could wander and sneak up on the carefully and look in the stream and see fish in there, darting, and try not to disturb them. I loved hiking up there, up to the lakes, and one of the animals that I enjoyed watching were I think they're called pikas. They're little rock rabbits about the size of a small squirrel. They live right in the rock piles where they can have some shelter and safety from predators. But up and down to Lake Mary and other places, just by myself. And this started, like I say, in the late mid 30s, from 1934 to 1940 possibly. Several times we went up there. I loved it. I enjoyed it. I looked forward to it. And there were other summer homes, especially summer homes in Brighton. Many of them log buildings or built in the 20s and 30s. But I had dreams of having a cabin there. After Lucy and I were married and came to live in the Salt Lake Valley, I started investigating. I told her how much I loved the canyons and in our early time in the valley. Why then we did go up the canyons and so forth, and I dreamed of how someday we would have a cabin there. One of my part-time jobs at that time was working at the newspaper. I worked at the newspaper as a proofreader, a copy reader in the evenings. And anyway, reading the want ads a little bit about property for sale, I came across an ad for two building lots at Brighton for sale. I called about them and found out where they were and what the costs were, and this had to be after 1950. 1951 we were married and we were living by I think 1953 or 54 we were out into the Granger area, but as I called about those lots and found out, I met the real estate man. We drove up to Brighton, started up the hillside, and we didn't get all the way to where the lots were. He was short of time, but he says they're right on up there. This was the slope going from the end of the loop, going up to the south, going up that way, up towards the summit of the pass that would go over and down into Heber City. He said, we don't have time to get all the way to the lots. We're almost there, but they're right up there, and he pointed up into some trees. And then we had to hurry back for his appointment. I decided that I wanted to buy one of those lots. And the cost was going to be about $1,200. It might have been $1,150. A fellow school teacher, this is one way that I come up with the time, because I was teaching at Monroe School at that time, so it'd have to be 1954 or 55, in that range. A fellow teacher, a single woman, offered to loan me the money to buy the lots. I had agreed to buy it at about $25 a month or something like that. But the man, the owner, wanted to sell the lots and discounted it down to about $850 for the lot. And this teacher, Miss Richardson, I think it was, offered to loan me that money in a personal loan so I could buy it, and that's how we got it. But we visited the lot in the following years, and I dreamed of having a place. Of course, we found out where it was, obviously. We dreamed, and it was not until I think sometime in the 1970s, 20 years went by. We didn't have the money to build, but we had the dream, the vision, the dream of having a place where my family, my children, could learn to love the mountains and have the experiences and the fun of walking up and down those streams and of seeing the wildlife. And but at any rate, in the 1980s, we were far enough along that we had some money, and I had salvaged some lumber from different sources, helped tear down a big old warehouse in Salt Lake City. And for helping tear it down, I had some lumber that could be used. And we eventually built the building, got the building started in the 80s. Building the home that was there. And, Lucy's sister Dorothy and her husband Walter came to Utah one summer and helped. Our boys helped quite a bit, and we built the foundation and didn't get any more than that done the first summer. So we put temporary boards across the foundation, covered it with a tarp, and then went into the winter season. And the next year, that's when Dorothy and Walter came to help raise the walls and continued to build. It has been a beautiful place for us. We've added to it. Right now, this year of 2015, our son Dan has spearheaded the work and taken a lot of days off work to help build and enlarge the cabin a little bit and to finish off the upstairs. And at this time, right now, this is tomorrow, the carpet for the 2 bedrooms and the bathroom upstairs should be carpeted. And then we'll arrange to restore the outside of the building, some repair work and some maintenance work. Next year, we should have sewer to the building, and that would be an expense, but something we can handle. There's more interest in the cabin right now by our children and their children, and they want to use it, and want to have it fixed up nicely, and we think we'll be able to do that. Currently, we're living in a little home in South Jordan, just a couple of blocks north of the Jordan River Temple. We got there quite quickly when we made a decision. We made a decision after we had come home from our mission that we would look for a place to live. We came home to the cabin. Our home in Granger had been sold. We came to the cabin to live while we found a place to live in the valley. Lucy had been working on her family history work, which she is doing right now. She's here at the Family History Library and checking on some things to get back into her genealogical record keeping. But at any rate, while living at Brighton, she had some records, some names to submit to the temple for temple work. We came down the canyon and came to the temple, and while she was having the names processed, they mentioned to her, would you, your husband, like to come and be proxies at the library? We come several times for her to have names approved, and we said, well, you need to know where we're living. We're living up the canyon, and sometimes the snowy roads and so on. Oh, that's all right. If you missed a day, that wouldn't be too bad. We'd know that there were good reasons. So anyway, we started there. During of our 14 years at Brighton, I think we'd only been there a couple of years when we started that, coming down to eat once a week, to come to the Jordan River Temple. That we were reflecting a little bit that it was encouraging for us to come. We got acquainted, we enjoyed it. We did. The only time that we missed our assignment at the temple was when we came around a bend in the road coming down the canyon, and a rock rolled into the road and I hit it. I had to either hit it or swerve into oncoming traffic, and I chose to hit the rock. It blew out the tire. We coasted to a stop. So we rode to town that day in a tow truck, and I think I rode in the truck, and Lucy rode to the driver's truck with him. That's the only time we missed our assignment because of travel conditions, snow slides, and that was always cleared and so forth, so we could get through. It's been a beautiful time to live. While turning in names at the temple one day, we on our way home, we drove by a neighborhood and saw a sign, for sale, what we call a sandwich sign, or a sandwich board sign that was out on the curb. We swung around and traveled back to it. We just barely passed it, and got out. And we're talking to the people, and Lucy says, when she saw it, that was ours. It was going to be our home. And we moved in there about 7 years ago now, that we have lived there. It's been a beautiful place to live. It's not a big fancy home, a big place for a big garden, big lawns, flower beds, trees, and lovely people in the neighborhood. People who have welcomed us into what was River Ridge Estate and River Ridge First Ward. The chapel is immediately adjacent to the Jordan River Temple. But we've been able to maintain that little home, fix it up a little bit. From time to time we find something else that needs to be done, like repairs to the roof or things of that nature. But we have enjoyed it and have loved the people that welcomed us into that ward. And now, a year or so ago, the state was rearranged to have 11 wards instead of 9 wards. And we're in a new ward. We're now in 10th ward. And in the meantime, a new building has been built. We're members of that new 10th ward. And we don't know how much time we have, but we're comfortable and we're able to take care of it. We've been able to serve in church callings, one most notable of which was with the Cub Scouts for 2 or 3 years. That was something we'd never done before. And but Lucy had done that. She had taken care of our boys all the time that they were in Cub Scouts. So, but I was busy with other activities and other assignments. Right now, she's in the other room, working on some of her things. I will come back and be better organized and have some plans in mind as to things that I'll check and see what I have for my military time, from friends who have been so important in my life and have helped me so much. Right now, there's been a real blank in my life history. It's been several years since I've written anything for it. So I welcome having this opportunity. This is going to be a nice way to get some things started. Our 2 daughters have both been encouraging us to work on this and get it done better. I thought of something I haven't had before. I could record something about pets we've had from the time with the family when we were up on the Provo River. One time we came home with a dog from there. There was a dog that was wandering. We brought that one home. It seemed to be lost. We never knew the story. That was kind of like a little, not a German Shepherd, but a type of a sheepdog that was running loose, and evidently a fairly young animal. But it came home, and the pets we've had in our lives, this is something that perhaps some of our great-grandchildren might enjoy knowing about. It's quite quite a menagerie that we've had, especially when the kids were growing up. Well, I have five minutes to go on this timer. We'll see. Well, signing off with five minutes left on the timer. The brother that was helping us is busy, so I'll just leave. We're down to 4 minutes.
Like access to the cafeteria, please have to look upstairs for the security code to open the door. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thumb drive, is that what they call this little piece?
Yeah. Memory stick,